Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Broadland Overview at the Scrutiny Committee meeting for the 6th of January 2026. I trust everyone's had a nice Christmas and New Year period and enjoying being back here. Please be advised, everyone, that this is a public meeting and it's being live streamed on the Council's YouTube channel. We'll start with declarations of interest. We have none. Apologies for absence and substitutes.
Yes, Chair, we have apologies from Councillor Karimi Guvan-Liu and Councillor Wymark, and their substitutes are Councillor Beadle and Councillor Brennan.
Hopefully Councillor Beadle, obviously lost track of the time, all the roads are not as good his way. Is he on his way, do we know? Was it, you're more his way, aren't you? I don't know if the roads are worse out your way. I know he does live down a road which doesn't get gritted, so there we go. Okay, we move on to the minutes of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee meeting held on the 2nd of December. Any comments, observations to be made about those? No, all happy to accept that they are true, fair record. Thank you. We'll move on then to announcements, of which I have none. Public speaking.
There's no public speaking, Chair.
Wonderful. Okay, we'll move on to the first item, the Cabinet reports, the safeguarding policy. And no, either that or someone is coming through from the other side. I hadn't expected to receive a... I was worried I was going to have to say knock twice if you can hear us. Thank you. I'll hand over to the officers. So you're just here in time for the whole item, which means you will be able to vote.
John, fill your glass.
Ready? Hello, everyone. You know who I am. This is Tabitha, formal. She's our operational safeguarding lead. I'll come on to talk about what her role is. She's far more knowledgeable about this subject than I, so any questions will likely go to her, but we shall continue. So you'll have all seen the report. This is a new safeguarding policy that was implemented as a result of the audit that we had back in March of last year. I don't want you to think, though, that we've not ever had anything formal that talks about what we do around safeguarding. The audit highlighted that we've been working to a safeguarding protocol, not a policy. So it's a very minor tweak, turning it into a policy, but it does have wider benefits. It's given us an opportunity to review everything that we do in terms of safeguarding. The audit wouldn't be an audit without giving us some recommendations, but I can assure you that most of what it said was that everything was being done really well. This policy confirms all of that. It gives a good overview of what we do. It gave us a chance to get up to date with current legislation. Things move on, as you know, all the time. And it also gave us a chance to have a little look at the sorts of bits and pieces we do operationally and strategically. So this new policy identifies all of those bits and pieces. The audit also recommended that we had somebody in post who would have a role in overseeing all stuff around safeguarding, hence Tabitha's new role. And she's been in post a good while now, so has been instrumental in bringing this piece of work together, and also continues to make sure that we're doing the right thing in terms of operational and strategic safeguarding and making sure that we are keeping our residents safe. I think that's all I'm going to say. It's pretty self-explanatory, to be honest, and if anyone's got any questions, then we'd be thrilled to answer them.
Thank you. We'll have Lacey first and Stuart.
Thank you. I've got a few, sorry. Safe recruitment. Do we have an existing policy for that, and what's in it?
It's being worked on at the moment with a dedicated resource within the people team. So they're developing and working on that as we speak, and it's incorporating some of that within this policy to complement and reflect the work which is happening, and that's an ongoing piece of work as well.
At the minute, we've got in the policy that it will be for DBS checks and references will be for staff who are working directly with children and vulnerable adults. Is that not the policy across all of the recruitment in the council?
There is specific guidance around who can be DBS'd, and we have to adhere to those government standards. So there's also a difference between a basic DBS and an enhanced, and actually most roles, certainly within my service, don't actually meet the requirements for enhanced DBS even. So we'll make sure that we're in line with everything that the government states. We're unable to do DBSs even where we push for it for those further enhanced, but that's because of government legislation. But certainly we are making sure that people are DBS checked before they are in post.
So does that apply? Do we do references for every post regardless of whether DBS is needed or not?
Yes, that would be a question for the people team to confirm, but as far as I'm aware, I can't see why we wouldn't. Yeah.
So you're working on that safer recruitment policy as part of this work, that will cross-reference into the safeguarding policy?
What's happening, the lead on safer recruitment helped write these bits within this policy, so it's absolutely going to mirror what activity is happening. So operationally, they are working on implementing all of that within safer recruitment. Yeah.
So hypothetically, if somebody came in, didn't need to be DBS checked, references were done, but then changed roles, would that recruitment process then follow on? Okay. The reporting back from the designated safeguarding lead, is that going to be reported back to members, and how frequently will that happen?
We are working on pulling together a dashboard of safeguarding data as we speak, so we should have a first iteration of that soon. What that won't necessarily do is look back, because we can't count what we weren't trying to count in the first place. It makes it really difficult. But from this point forward, we will have certain criteria that we are absolutely going to recruit on. And I would just emphasise that will get better as time goes on. This will be the first stab at it.
We've got a training programme coming through, and I know for people who are involved in like the designated safeguarding leads will have that regular training. Will that apply to all staff? I know that, like you said, that policies nationally change, legislation changes. It's always good to have that refresh. Is there going to be like a timeline of training programme?
That is reflective in the accompanying procedure, which I'm working on at the moment as well. And part of that will ensure that the training is part of everyone's induction, because it's everybody's responsibility, but also to complement that, to make sure that it's embedded within the first 6 months of somebody starting employment. They then have additional training, face-to-face training, to make sure they absolutely understand their responsibility. Again, it's role specific depending on their role and their responsibility, and again, depending on their role, they'll have additional training to make sure that they are as confident and competent to identify safeguarding and then respond to it. So everybody will have induction training as part of their e-learning when they first start, and everybody will have face-to-face training within the first 6 months. And I'll take a look at kind of going backwards to see where else the needs are, because we can only move forwards with this, but it's identifying where there's a need and making sure that's fulfilled.
And I believe that on a 12-monthly basis, all staff have to repeat safeguarding training as an e-learning module. Yeah.
I was just thinking like first aid runs out after X amount of time. It's and then finally, prevent training. It's only mentioned for taxi and private hire licences. Is that not standard prevent training across anybody who's doing anything with vulnerable adults, children? I'm just surprised that it's only mentioned in the taxi and private hire licence.
We are going to build that into the safeguarding training that we're doing in person, to make sure that everybody who needs to know this needs to know that. That was part of the licensing element of safeguarding, and that's part of their requirement nationally. But when we look at doing that in-person training, it will cover a wide variety. Safeguarding is huge, so it will cover a wide variety of the modern slavery and prevent, which we need to be doing. So anything which is in the national legislation of us having to deliver will actually be part of that training.
Okay, we'll go to Stuart, then we'll go to Martin. Straight to Martin then.
Thank you. I've only got two points. And the first one was on page 19, which is page 2 of the actual policy. It says here about the review date being every 3 years. Now, whilst I understand that we've been doing everything but without the policy, I would have thought that the instigation of the policy would mean that the policy would be reviewed within the first 12 months to ensure that it's working properly, and then once it's followed would then go to 3 monthly after that.
The 3 month. Whilst it is every 3 years, I want to assure you that for as long as Tabitha's here, this document will be used every single day. So if any changes need to be made, it will be, and we will absolutely factor in a review at that point through the strategic group, so it won't go undone.
Lovely. And then on page 29, which is page 12 of the policy, it's the gambling licensing. Now, I remember discussing this before when we were looking at the gambling licensing, because we don't have the venues within Broadland, but they did in South Norfolk, which is why they're using that one. But I wondered whether or not we should have one specifically for Broadland.
Just licensing for both.
Yeah,
No.
this policy does cover both districts, so it being in here is because it would cover both.
But then when you look, the document is actually just a South Norfolk Council gambling one, and it was, by the looks of it, because it was approved in September, was it?
Yeah. We could make it more specific to state that it's for South Norfolk only, that it relates to gambling, if we don't need it for Broadland. But that, I don't know enough on that to
Yeah.
say for sure, but I'll check.
Emma.
Thank you. Just a couple of questions. One is, I think it looks like there's quite a lot of good stuff in the pipeline. I just wondered if there was a ETA on dates of when the other recruitments that dovetail in, the other policies that dovetail into this are likely to come to members. And then the second one was, I recognise that you said about building prevent into the face-to-face training that could take place within the first 6 months. Is any consideration being given to the fact that it could also be completed online within an initial induction period, so that people are more aware and they're not waiting for that training?
Prevent training is already part of the e-learning package. There's modern slavery and prevent, so that is part of somebody's initial induction anyway. So it will again be a reminder to be reinforced and revisited as part of that whole safeguarding package. So it will be, it'll be reinforced, because somebody's first time, e-learning it. So we just kind of want to make sure that people understand it. So it's just a bit of assurance.
And in answer to your question about the other policies, I don't know off the top of my head what the timescales on them are, but we'll double check, and again we can send that information around.
Anybody else? I will just say that the training is, it looks like it's a little bit more, what the word I'm looking for here, not rigid, something that has more strength to it, because in the past, when I was a councillor, 2010 to 2015, there was an insistence on members having to do training. I'm a safeguarding lead at my school. The training that I was being asked to do was insufficient for a teaching assistant at my school, let alone for what my standard of training was, and they were insisting I had to do it. And actually I dug my heels in and said, I'm not wasting my time for a certificate of attendance, because basically you attended something, you got a certificate to say you attended. Whether you'd taken any of it in or not was by the by. And I just said, I'm not wasting anyone's time. And I said, you can check my qualifications if you want. and no one pressed it after that. But I'm pleased this seems to be a little bit more stringent in its sort of in the way that it's been done and the timetables are being hit, because you know the risks of not following through and looking after everybody, because this isn't just about looking after children as is in my case, but you know every single member of staff from whatever background they are. So just on the point of the training, the top-up training or the annual top-up, is there a sort of Q&A type element to that? Is there an expectation that people get a certain score or that they've shown a degree of understanding, or is there still some like, well, I've done it and I've now signed off to say I've done it?
I'll let Tabitha answer the question about the Q&A, but one thing I haven't mentioned, and I hope it's come across, is the difference in levels of training that will be given as well. So everybody, it's everyone's responsibility. I say this all the time, safeguarding is for everybody, but there are within the organisation designated safeguarding leads, and they will be trained to a different level. So it just reminded me when you said about Q&A, what we really encourage staff to do is have a basic level of understanding about safeguarding, but if in any doubt, ask a DSL, or really importantly speak to Tabitha, because the last thing I'd want people to do is make a decision based on an unsure. So the question and answer thing doesn't just apply in the training, it applies all day, every day. If you're unsure, there's something else you want to know about safeguarding, reach out and speak to somebody that has done and kind of lives and breathes it. But in terms of the actual training itself,
it's really important to ensure that there's so many different learning styles that people have, and it's making sure that people receive and learn that information, and people learn very differently, as you know. So it's making sure that people understand, but also revisiting. So it's working with their teams, working with their managers to understand what other needs there might be and revisit those needs. So it's really working towards a needs-based kind of learning package. It's rather than parachuting in and parachuting out, it's continuing to learn, nurture, create a space where people can feel confident in asking questions, because I think that's so important, that people don't feel they should know it or it's not their responsibility. So it's also embedding that confidence and building those relationships with teams and people who respond and identify to safeguarding. So it's wider than training, I think, but it will be needs based, and there will be evaluation. So it's not just after the training, but also in practice. So it's working with the team leaders, the managers, dip sampling, evaluating some of the referrals, understanding why there's no referrals, and that's quite surprising. Why aren't there? So it's taking a whole kind of council look to see where their needs are and then responding to that.
When you say about whole council, do you think the culture, there has to be a safeguarding culture in place? There has to be a sense that of an immediacy needed to deal with something and not having to wait for someone to speak to someone. I can give an example of my school. We were actually interviewing somebody, and one of our teachers knocked on the door and said, I'm really sorry, but I need to speak to someone right now. And we suspended the interview, and two of us leadership went out and dealt with that, and with the person who was being interviewed actually did get the job, but it wasn't because of the way they dealt with that. It was actually, I think, you know, there was a sense that there is no wrong time to ask a safeguarding question, and that no one's going to get in trouble for doing that. And I think that the culture, that message hopefully will get around from this, because it is so important that things are dealt with immediately.
great, yes. Yeah, that's absolutely right.
Shane.
You've got the break here. You just raised an issue where you've been called in from an interview. Whether you've got the designated officer, that designated officer is not there or is on holiday or something. Is there an alternative, another place that they can go to?
There is a team of designated safeguarding leads, and I'm being really specific when I say that. We're moving away from this idea of a safeguarding officer. A lead needs to be someone who's got responsibility for a service and can make decisions as necessary. So there will always be a list. There will always be someone around that you can go to who is a safeguarding lead, and we will make that very clear. We've also got safeguarding champions and all sorts of things. So depending on your level of need, there should never be a time where A, it's not the most important thing and would override stuff, and B, there wouldn't be someone you could speak to.
So where it mentions the designated safeguarding officer here, should that not then be changed to designated safeguarding lead?
If you've managed to find the word officer in there, then yes, it absolutely should be changed to lead. Yeah, we will absolutely, yes, no question.
Yeah, 2.2, page 8, page 15.
Can I just also ask, how do you publicise, I don't publicise the wrong word, but how do you make known to people in a very open way that these are the people you need to go to if you've got an immediate problem? Is it through the system? If they typed in, they're looking at something, if they typed in safeguarding, will it bring them up under that title if someone's looking for them? Is it easy for staff to find those people? Do they know them by name or by face? I mean, again, this is how it works within a school situation, but we have 6 designated safeguarding leads at our school. We are known as the Safeguarding 6, and the children know who they are, and they come and see you, even if they're not in your year group or even you deal with them, but they'll come over and say, I mean, often it's about someone's taken their ball, but they still want to come and see you to tell you, because they see you as one of the people who are able to sort things out. And so within staff, is that really publicised so that they know who to get to and find a quick route?
The short answer is yes, and it will only be further enhanced and people will be more confident. Within my own service, for example, all of myself and the managers are safeguarding leads, and the team know that. But we'll do even more promotion of that. As I said, this will only improve as time goes on. To share those names and make sure people know.
And that will also be, we'll do a communication strategy when the procedure is ready to be communicated as well. So that will be a fresh list of who to contact, how to contact, when they're available, and all the contingencies if they can't contact. And I'll be obviously front and centre of that because I'm the consistent, and the out of hours and all of that. That will all, that'll be a fresh list and communicated. And also, I am going to arrange going to teams across the councils to make sure that they understand what the policy is, what the procedure is, and how they can. How they can use that, but also who to contact and why. So it's the smaller safeguarding elements as well.
Has anybody got anything else they'd like to add? No, everyone seems happy. Okay, well the recommendation is clearly stated there. All those in favour of the recommendation?
And that's carries.
Thank you ever so much for answering our questions and reassuring us. Thank you. We now move on to the waste services policy, and we've got Scott and others. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. So the purpose of this report is to present the waste services policy, which brings together existing service standards, operational practices and decision-making principles into a single clear framework document. Historically, many aspects of the waste service have been managed through kind of custom and practice and operational guidance rather than through a formally adopted policy. So this document provides clarity for everyone, members, officers and residents about how the waste services will operate, how we handle requests and exceptions. The policy is also designed to support the Council's preparation for national waste reforms, simpler recycling, packaging, extended producer responsibility under PEPR, as we call it. Local authorities will be required to demonstrate that the waste services that we provide are efficient and effective. So having this framework supports that evidence and helps demonstrate that we can reach high quality outcomes for our recycling service. It doesn't introduce anything new really, there's nothing groundbreaking unfortunately in here, but as I say, it just provides the structure and discipline needed to manage the service more transparently and consistently. So happy to take any questions, comments.
We'll start with Stuart then to Martin.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think it's a good idea, excellent idea. How will this work in relation to the Norfolk Waste Partnership, and will other councils, members of the partnership, adopt a similar policy so you get standardisation effectively across the county, which I would have thought would make a lot of sense, especially with the new legislation coming down the track? Is that the case?
Obviously, Broadland District Council is an entity in itself, and the service we deliver does have its differences from other members of the Waste Partnership. There'll be a lot of commonality. We are concurrently developing the South Norfolk Waste Services Policy, which will have a lot of similarities to the Broadland one, as I've authored both of them. But elsewhere across the partnership, I think there's a mixture. Some councils have got published policies, others haven't. Whether this will cause others to follow, I don't know. But generally, we all operate in broadly similar ways, but there are differences due to contractual obligations and contractual requirements and things like that, and different standards that members at the respective authorities have over the years, I suppose, asked for.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much answered that. But I think, would you not agree that that would be beneficial with a degree of standardisation, especially because we all have to be compliant with the same legislation, and the districts in their current role are effectively the collection agency, and the county in its current role is a disposal agency. So it would make sense that there's a degree of standardisation, because if you're all using, for argument's sake, the county as the disposal agency, the way in which you get there would make sense to be pretty standard, would both offer economies of scale, efficiency, standardisation, and benefits, most importantly, to the end user, our customer of the service.
I think you're preempting LGR in the sense that the work's starting already on looking to align the waste service to how waste services are delivered across the county. We're starting that work now, so in the long term, yes. In the short term, there will be differences, but obviously we're working toward more standardisation as quickly as possible.
But would you agree it's eminently sensible?
Oh yes, yeah, totally, yeah.
Thank you. My question was around the recommendation, because it only has delegation of authority to the Assistant Director of Community Services, without any reference to the portfolio holder or member. And while it says minor operational amendments, again, it's the degree, because there, what does minor mean in that respect? Now, if it has the oversight of the member and the portfolio holder, then that means that it has that coverage.
Yeah, I think we can adjust that. Yeah.
Obviously, we can only vote on the recommendation, but we because this is cabinet, isn't it? So we can make our own, but we can make observations. But yeah.
We can suggest that the recommendation be changed.
So, Chair, you can make a suggested amendment to the recommendation for Cabinet to consider, but I would also suggest if that is something the committee would like to do, we could also ask officers to speak to the portfolio holder before the meeting as well about that. But you can make that recommended adjustment.
I suppose before we go down that avenue, just not to close it off, but is there a rationale behind that wording, you believe, or is that just sort of a generalisation of a wording which has been used for the purposes of just in case, or is that based on some sort of precedent of things that have had to be done at short notice?
I think it was standard on what I'd seen in other areas, to be honest. it was never intended to be, you know, we will change this aspect of the policy. It was for minor, very minor, but I appreciate that's not something that's defined. So I think as you know, as it's a policy that will ultimately end up with full council, we've got time to review that and make that change ahead of the policy actually being adopted, because yeah, I think it's fine.
If I come back to Martin in a moment for what he might want to suggest, so I'll just give you a second, Martin, then we'll go around, then we'll come back to you. Does that seem fair? Just give you just just time to sort of exactly how you say what you want. Go on.
I mean, literally, after the assistant director of community services, in consultation with the portfolio holder,
That's right.
and it makes it.
In consultation with the portfolio, that'd be all right, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Personally, I don't see a problem with that because I think that strengthens it rather than weakens it. But I don't know what other people might want to say. Shall we? Obviously, well, we can vote on that now. I didn't know if we wanted to just park it and then have the discussion, but we can. Do we want to?
Just wait until the end of the debate.
We'll wait until the end of the debate, but we'll that's been noted, so we know what we're voting on at the end. Has anybody else got any other questions about the substance of this?
Thank you, Chair. I hope this is not going to echo too much. Page 35, 3.1, going on to page 36, it mentions about some cases being managed on a sort of case-by-case basis. So I don't know what kind of precedents have been set there, but can you explain what those case-by-case bases might be and how they might impact or be affected by standardising anything under a policy?
Sorry, can you just clarify which section, because I'm not working off the same papers you are. I've got just the policy document, so I don't think our page numbers are the
Page on
same.
cabinet, is it?
Yeah, it says, as a result, service standards responses to service requests and approaches to issues such as contamination, sideways container provision and assisted collections have been managed on a case-by-case basis. It's 3.1.
3.1.
So that's what happens currently without the policy. So there are some unpublished standards that the council and officers have worked to that have developed through the contractual mechanisms and things like that. So this policy is designed to take away that case-by-case basis, as it were, and have that standard framework for those decisions to be taken.
So does that mean that the outcome where the policy has been created does this enhance the service delivery to the service user, or does it would it become punitive?
Essentially neither. It's simply formalising those currently informal processes and procedures.
So removing the ambiguity. Yeah. Anybody else? Peter.
If I understand the basis of this report, we're being told that all we're actually doing is formalising that which already happens and occurs. Can we have a categorical assurance that nothing has been slipped in?
It's tidied up the approach that was perhaps a little more scattergun to charging for commercial waste. I think what has gone on historically has not had a lot of structure to it and hasn't necessarily always followed the legislation. So the recommendation or the policy suggests that we follow the legislation. I don't think that's going to be to anyone's detriment. More to some customers' benefit, where they may have paid the cost of waste disposal historically and may not have been required required to. Other than that, I can't think of anything that, that change probably is because Broadland hasn't really had much in the way of commercial waste historically. But other than that, I don't think there's anything that, as I said before, isn't kind of current custom and practice.
Chairman, I think I take that at face value. A question about an experience I had some time ago. I don't know whether this has actually been addressed, so it would never occur again. When on one occasion my bin wasn't emptied, I phoned through and said my bin hasn't been emptied, and I was told I had to submit visual evidence to show that the bin hadn't been emptied. Quite what the purpose of that was, I wasn't sure, because, you know, why would I want to take a photograph of a bin that hadn't been emptied, showing that it was full? So has that actually stopped? It's not appeared anywhere that I can find in this document, but can I be assured that the practice has ceased?
In answer to your question, I think this is where some of the ambiguity comes in the past, in the sense that a lot of people, not suggesting yourself, will obviously say they put their bin out and it's not collected because they didn't put their bin out. So the immediate response from a customer services member of staff would be to say, are you sure you've done that? Can you provide us with photographic evidence from it? Because most people at that point, if they haven't put their bin out, will say, well, maybe I didn't put my bin out and we won't come back for it. If the individual continues to say, yes, I did put my bin out and I can prove that, but I don't have any photographic evidence, then we're able to actually look on the CCTV cameras on the vehicles themselves. It's really a means to avoid a lot of residents who do say they put their bin out when they didn't put their bin out, and it costs us money to send Veolia back to collect their bin. So it's trying to avoid those situations.
That I don't dispute, but what puzzled me, if my bin was full and I took a photograph of it, how does that demonstrate that I hadn't put it out at the requisite time and it hadn't been emptied? It seemed to me bizarre because it didn't show anything of any value whatsoever.
Yeah, I think the information you've been given is, I think what it's more about is, have you got a date stamped photo to show that you had your bin out at the time, or have you got a ring bell that shows, you know, your bin was out at 6:30 in the morning, which is the required time that you have to put your bin out at. Sorry?
I think under the policy, that's not something we'll be asking residents to do.
Yeah.
Yep.
I'll just come back on that to give you an instance. Probably the council was spending something like £120,000, £130,000 a year on getting Veolia to return for missed bins, the majority of which were not missed bins. So effectively tightening up the policy saved the council a considerable sum of money.
Has anybody else got anything they'd like to ask? Yeah, Jonathan.
I believe there was an issue with the app for Christmas collections. Now, because with that, obviously, I nearly came a cropper with it, but luckily I remembered I'd got the leaflet on the fridge as well, which had the right date on it, because obviously with that was the bins were collected earlier. Now, I would feel there would be a lot of missed bins then, and were there a lot, and did that cost us extra to do that? Because obviously that was a bit of an error, and obviously for some people, not having the bin collected would have left them stuck because it was the recycling bin, and obviously over Christmas you had lots of, mine was full anyway, even though I did have it collected.
I think in those circumstances, if there's an error on our behalf, then we will go back and collect the bins, because it's not the residents' fault in that sense. And there were some confusion around that particular one, because they were drawn forward, weren't they? The bin collection came forward rather than went back, which is unusual. So in those circumstances, if it's an error on our behalf, then we will go back and collect them.
Just in relation to that incident, whilst it's not necessarily within the scope of what we're discussing here this evening, I'm happy to answer it. Yes, there were some issues with the data that Veolia supply into the app on a daily basis. It went incorrectly after the collections that were usually on a Monday but were pulled forward to the Saturday took place. The data in Veolia's system updated itself to show the collection being on Monday again. And so those users that were affected got another notification on Sunday evening to say the bin was being emptied on Monday, when in fact it had already been emptied on Sunday. I was aware of 2 customers that contacted us as a result of that to say that they didn't get the original notification, but they did get the second notification, which I find slightly odd, because we also sent out other push notifications around those changes as well. So fortunately we've learned from it. It's obviously a new app, and we've got a new way of communicating with Veolia's system to ensure that the collections are up to date. It was an unforeseen event happening, and obviously being over the weekend, we were not around to pick up on it.
Stuart.
Thank you, Chair. Moving away from misspins, if we go to the introductory document, under summary 1.3, the last sentence says, the policy will also help the council demonstrate service effectiveness and operational consistency in relation to future packaging external producer responsibility payments. My understanding is that these are being consolidated into the rate support grant, and that there won't be specific to each authority. So I'm just wondering where this actually affects the PER, whatever the initials are, you know, and how it's allocated, because of the difference in allocating the rate support grants in the future.
Yeah, I think there's a bit of confusion there. We were expecting additional extended producer responsibility funding for, sorry.
You're good at that, aren't you?
Yeah. The extended producer responsibility funding, new burden, I'll get it right now. We were expecting additional new burdens funding when food waste is introduced from April 2026. Broadland would have still got that funding, even though we provide the food waste service. That funding was rolled into the overall grant funding that the council gets. This is additional funding. This is different funding that is collected from the producers of the dry recycling materials and paid out to individual authorities. And as Scott said earlier, the amount we get in future is partly dependent upon whether we can prove to PAC UK, which is the government body that distributes the funding, that we provide an efficient and effective service. So they're 2 slightly different amounts of money. So EPR funding or PEPR funding isn't going to be rolled into the overall grant settlement figure that we get.
So if it's not going to be rolled into it, what's the projections the council are using for future funding through this source of income?
So next year, if I remember off the top of my head, sorry, I know what it was for South Norfolk because I wrote it down in another report today. Yeah, it's about 1.5 million this year, going down to about 1.3 million in 2026, 27 financial year. Don't quote me on that. I can give you the exact figure if you want. That funding is it's technically a non-ring-fenced grant that's coming in for us, but increasingly DEFRA and PAC UK, who are collecting the money on behalf of the producers of the waste materials, are suggesting or indicating that local authorities should be spending that money on their recycling services and not using it to balance their budgets. Now, in the case of Broadland, our recycling services cost in excess of the amount of money we get from we would get from PEPR funding anyway. So it's quite easy to demonstrate that that funding is being spent on the provision of the dry recycling services.
Thank you for that. My recollection is that in the previous financial year, or still the current financial year, we received over 1.9 million.
Yeah, that is correct. That is it was subsequently reduced, but the government guaranteed the amount of money we will get in this financial year. So Cabinet made the decision to ring fence some of that funding into a grant, into a ring fence pot that we can spend within the waste service for recycling initiatives. So the dry recycling initiatives support the recycling team, and the other we use to support the delivery of the dry recycling service.
Thank you for that. So could you give us an indication of what the cost of this service is likely to be, either currently or in the future? It was an or, not and.
Yeah. So it's in excess of £1.9 million. Off the top of my head, I don't know if you can.
What, the whole waste service?
No, the dry recycling element.
Dry recycling. I mean, the PAC UK funding for PEPR is not specific to recycling. We do get costs associated with collecting packaging through the residual waste as well. I mean, the cost of the waste contract with Veolia is in excess of £5 million. So yeah, we were looking at some figures earlier, about £5.6 million for this year.
So taking into account that PEPR funding, the recycling credits we get, the income from garden waste services, etc. There's still a net cost to the council to provide the waste services.
Before we go to Martin's amended version, or amendment first before we go to it, anybody else? Okay, but go on.
If you look at the safeguarding policy, that has what Martin suggested in it as well, around consultant of the portfolio holder. So I don't think that's anything unreasonable to insert in there.
No, I feel it strengthens it rather than weakens it. So I think, it tightens everything up and makes it the same as everything else. So yeah. So are we all, I think we need to hear exactly what Martin said, so we are formally doing it correctly.
In consultation with the portfolio holder for environmental excellence.
Right, just adding that in after community services.
Yes.
Yeah. All those in favour of the amended amendment, before we go to the substantive, all those in favour of the amendment?
Yeah, that's carried, yeah.
Okay, so all those in favour of the proposal as amended?
Yeah, carried.
Thank you. Thank you very much for answering all our questions. And the regulation of investigatory powers, or as James described it to me earlier, RIPA, which somehow sounds a lot more fun. And Louise, sorry, yeah, it's Louise, isn't it? You've spelled, is that, that's not a completely different name that I've got on here.
That's Louise.
Yes, but that's not, that doesn't say Louise, James, come on. It says Lucy on here. I was about to say, I teach lots of children with different names, but I've never taught Lucy. So.
Okay, for those of you who don't know me, I'll just quickly introduce myself. It is Louise, not Lucy. Lucy, whatever you say. Louise Simmons, and I'm the new Assistant Director of Regulatory Services. So this report, I will just refer to it as RIPA because it's easier to pronounce, but it relates to the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act. So the report basically presents for consideration and adoption an updated policy. The council does already have a RIPA policy, but it was last introduced in 2023, and it just required review and update to take into consideration new legislation that has come in throughout 2025. So basically, if I just explain what RIPA is briefly first. So the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act and the Investigatory Powers Amendments Act, which came in June 2025, it provides the legal framework for public authorities, including councils, to carry out covert surveillance work. So covert surveillance work is where we undertake investigations into various people or businesses, typically without their prior knowledge. So we're obtaining personal information without them giving them knowledge or informing them up front. So it's covert surveillance, and it's to obtain information and communication data lawfully. So the whole legislation is in place to make sure we do that in a lawful way in accordance with people's human rights. So it ensures that the action that we undertake is necessary and proportionate. It avoids or minimises the impact on other people who are not subject to investigation, and it makes sure that all of our activities are undertaken and are authorised and is overseen to protect individuals' rights. So to give you a few examples of when we have used RIPA, most recently for fly tipping investigations, but it's also been used to generally for fraud investigations, just to undertake research and investigation, and also online activity, looking up information about certain people or businesses. And we've done that recently for homelessness application. So that just gives you a bit of an idea of what we use it for. Activities are only authorised for core functions specified in the legislation which relate to serious crime prevention and detection. We can't use it for general activities, and it's only for activities or crimes which where there's the serious crime threshold. So the punishment would be a minimum of 6 months imprisonment. So that's when we would have to get RIPA authorisation. So the new legislation came in, as I said, in June 2025, and alongside that came in codes of practice. So the reviewed and updated policy takes into consideration the new legislation and codes. It also, as I said, ensures compliance with the human rights, and it provides a clear framework for lawful, necessary and proportionate covert surveillance. It demonstrates that the Council takes the regulation of investigatory powers seriously, and it makes the whole process lawful, proportionate and transparent. It makes it clear to stakeholders how the Council will exercise its responsibilities, and it ensures that the Council has sufficient, appropriately authorised and trained officers to undertake the activities. And it also provides for a robust defence to any challenges that we may receive. The report also presents the use of RIPA policy and authorisation at Broadland District Council throughout 2025. And again, the annual report is considered best practice in line with the Investigatory Powers Commissioner's Office. We were last audited by the Commissioner's Office in 2020, and one of the recommendations coming out of that audit was to produce an annual report. So this is in accordance with that recommendation. So the annual RIPA report basically presents the fact that the RIPA process was used 3 times throughout 2025. One was a full RIPA application which related to a fly tipping investigation which we undertook down Beeston Road. That particular activity wasn't authorised because it was being undertaken on private land, and it was considered that the householder should use their own CCTV to protect their own sort of property and land, as opposed to us undertaking surveillance. Another time that it has been used throughout 2025 is for a non-RIPA operation which involved our taxi licensing team. And we worked alongside Norfolk Constabulary and officers of Norwich City Council, and basically we worked as undercover officers, just approaching taxis in the Norwich area, just to see whether they would accept people just turning up and without pre-booking taxis, to make sure that they're following the licence conditions appropriately. So the risks, if not adopted, basically we wouldn't be following the recommendations of the Commissioner's offices. It opens us up to potential challenges and criticism, and it wouldn't enable us to robustly defend our activities or decisions. There are no minimal resource implications other than officer training costs, which are already included within the budgeting. And that's really all I've got to say on the report. The recommendations are to note the report and provide any comments you may have, and to adopt the revised joint RIPA policy. Thank you.
Thank you. I see Martin and Shane, so I'll go in that order, and then anyone else after that.
Apologies, me again. So obviously the title of the report is the annual report and the joint policy review and update, but the actual policy is a background paper and not associated with here, so it's not saying where there are any updates or whatever within the policy. But I noted it was coming forward to council in 2026. Yes. As a separate thing, so it's not, the update of the policy is not actually on this document.
Okay, what I can do is make sure. What I can do is make sure we've got a table of a summary table of the key changes that have been made with the update.
Perfect. And then in the report itself, on the page 68, so it's given there the role of the elected members and scrutiny, and there where, I mean, it's almost stating the obvious really in that element on there, on saying what the role of the scrutiny panel, etc. But again, there under the role of the elected members, I would have thought there'd have been a little bit more of an expanded version on that, on what is our actual responsibility. Is it all members, or is it only members of the scrutiny panel?
Yeah, to answer that question, it's the whole of cabinet. It goes to cabinet for scrutiny as well as here.
So in that respect, then it's not all members; it's only members of the scrutiny committee and cabinet.
Yeah, that's correct.
Shane.
Thank you, Chair. It's part of the question has already been answered from what Councillor Morrow said, but with regards to the policy itself, I mean, obviously there was an original policy, and so what's been here is like updates, and presumably there might be one or two tweaks in that. But is there? I know that that's going to be sort of presented later, but are there any material differences to the original policy?
No, the main requirements of the legislation remains the same. It's minor updates really in line with the codes of practice that have been brought in June 2025, but the main points behind the legislation remain exactly the same. It's all about gathering the information in a lawful way and protecting human rights. So there's no major changes which affect any of that.
Stuart, then Eleanor.
Thank you. Can you just expand a little bit on the powers and the scope of the legislation? Can I assume the legislation can be used in conjunction with the police and the constabulary? For example, could it be used if you're investigating barbers, male bars, this kind of stuff? Could it be used there?
Yes, it could. So the legislation is, as I said, it's really prescriptive about what local authorities can use the the powers for, and it has to be in to the prevention of serious crime. So if it's something that legislation that we enforce, then yes, we can use it. And if it's something related to what we do, we generally tend to work with Norfolk Constabulary or with neighbouring authorities just to carry out the investigation. But it is really quite prescriptive. It has to meet the minimum serious crime threshold, and it has to be for legislation that we enforce for serious crime prevention.
Thank you. Yeah, just as a matter of interest, the report mentions the two acts, the 2001 and the amended act in 2025. But before that, were we having to abide by any legislation? Were councils undertaking surveillance activities at all before that? What was happening?
That's a good question. There wasn't the legislation. The whole reasoning behind that legislation coming in 2000 was to strengthen. There was legislation in place, but not to this extent, and not in line with the Human Rights Convention.
Do you envisage the growth of AI to have an impact on any of this for the future?
I believe it will do so, because the legislation does cover social media, and I would include AI within that definition. So the collection of information and personal information relating to an individual or business, it would need to be included within that.
More an observation, really, Chairman. We've got a piece of legislation which we can actually not only endorse, we can apply, and yet we hardly ever use it. I mean, it seems to me the opportunity for using it is much greater than we're actually doing. I mean, fly tipping is obviously becoming a huge problem nationally and probably locally as well. Certainly on my patch, I've had issues of fly tipping. So why isn't it we're using these facilities much more to deter those criminals who actually are deserving of our attention and hopefully fining or imprisoning?
That's a good question. I completely agree with you, and we are proposing to increase the use of it more. We're already working on a project in relation to fly tipping and surveillance. We're putting together a RIPA application as we speak, in relation to increased fly tipping incidents around the North Norwich Recycling Waste Centre. We've noticed that fly tipping incidents have increased by roughly about 33% around that area, around Horswood Felthorpe area. So we're planning, as long as we get appropriate authorisation for it, we were planning a surveillance operation to target that particular hotspot. But we do want to increase use of RIPA.
Waste collection, and I seem to remember I've made that point numerous times, and it was dismissed as no, there will be no increase, but of course patently there has been.
The other thing I just would like to add to that, obviously the RIPA legislation covers the social media use and AI use as well, which, to go back to the previous question, I can see that increasing more. So we will be using RIPA authorisations more. And we do also need to raise awareness of officers across the whole council about making sure that they record and apply appropriately when they're doing internet searches, because we need to make sure that that authorisation is in place before you casually search on the internet.
Yes, Mark.
That's right. When it comes to sort of like the investigation side of things, in the past, as councillors, we used to get sent a list of empty homes in our patches, but then they stopped sending us that list because of GDPR. So where the council is doing more investigating, we want to all see fly tip and stop, for instance. So how do councillors get involved without being against GDPR and things, where we we'd want to get because we're in our patch, if you know what I mean. So that's where Peter's saying the people who know most about sort of like fly tipping incidents will be the people in the patches. We don't expect officers to be out in every single patch every single week, as it were. But how do we get involved if, like I say, that was something that I thought was pretty straightforward, that was quite simple, that every member would get a list of these are 10 empty houses that are in your patch. And I used to, just in general, as you're going around in your patch on a sort of like on a period, you go to meetings, you do things, you see these houses. And I think a couple of times it was, this is on the empty house list. And I said, well, I think there's someone there. And that then fed back, and then the officer could check it out instead of having to visit all 10, as it were. They could just go to the ones and things. But like I say, that was stopped because of GDPR, that we couldn't have the information. So I wonder how this all links in, where the extra support and things from members, maybe for fly tipping, would give you more information. But would that come under the GDPR rules again?
It would. We have to be extremely careful with all personal information and act in accordance with GDPR and data protection regulations. So we couldn't just go. We'd have to have a purpose for using the information. There would be, if you had a particular concern about an area or property, you could refer that to the council, and the relevant team would investigate that. And again, if we were liaising with particular council about an area or an issue, then there was a good reason behind it, we would be able to potentially share information. But we have to be very careful with personal information, and we can't just release lists of addresses.
Anybody else? Oh, sorry, Mark. I feel skipping here. I'll skip to Jonathan.
So I'm guessing that none of the RIPA investigations can be done without going through magistrates. How much of a time constraint does that actually put on, or how much of a time does it add on? Does it actually hinder you doing that?
It can do, but we've got procedures in place. We've got the paperwork and procedures in place, and contacts at the courts, the Justice of the Peace contacts lined up, ready to use when needed. Not all RIPA applications require the full authorisation. So some of them, if they don't meet the serious crime threshold, for example, they don't need the full authorisation. So we can do it a simplified process. But as long as we follow the same principles within the policy, that's the importance of having the policy. So we do it all lawfully in accordance with that. Then we're sound on any decision making. But some of them we just get authorised internally within our own RIPA team and with authorised and trained officers, and we can do it that way. But if it's for serious crime detection, prevention, then we do have to go through a full authorisation. Yes, then we do have to go through the full officer authorisation and go to the court for get full court authorisation too.
So you can't actually gather any information before?
No. We can't carry out any surveillance until it's authorised to do so. In the particular RIPA application that was in Broadland in 2025, it wasn't authorised, so we didn't proceed with it. We didn't proceed with the investigation.
Stuart Beadle.
Yeah, it's a minefield, isn't it? For many a decade, I was actually on a tribunal, and occasionally we would get these cases whereby the council a council, not this one, because I weren't allowed with this one, a council would allege that property was being occupied by 2 or more adults, when the person living there was actually saying, I'm living on my own. And the authorities were going to the utilities and asking, and the utility companies couldn't refuse, for a copy of their utility bills. And they would have an average of what the consumption would be for a person living on their own compared to 2 or more people. Now, I think that's bordering on, bluntly being wrong. and I do think the legislation ought to be tightened up, and I haven't been on the tribunal for quite a few years now, but I presume this sort of thing doesn't happen anymore.
That used to be the team that I worked in, so I can answer this. But it's very rare that we would resort to that extent of surveillance. We would typically use direct information during visits, or speaking to tenants or occupants of the property. And we use forms now where we tenant information forms where we find out occupancy numbers. And there's lots of other information that we can go to before we would go to those extremes. But if we had to do that, then we would make sure we followed the correct authorisation process. But I can't recall the last time that we had to do that within the housing standards team.
It was a rarity, Chair.
Martin.
Sorry, I just wanted to go back to the previous point, and I wondered whether I could ask the members of the committee how many of them have actually read the revised joint RIPA policy. The revised joint policy. Well, we're being asked to recommend to Cabinet to adopt the revised joint RIPA policy. If we are doing so, then the question is, how many people have seen or read the revised joint RIPA policy?
The whole policy. Yeah. No, I've not read the whole policy, no. No.
So the question then, Chair, would be, how can we actually recommend Cabinet to adopt the
Chair.
Yes, I mean, there's how do we? I guess there's the element of trust, that we are trusting that the documents are being brought before us in good faith, and that we are picking apart elements that have got particular interest or knowledge in. But yeah, there's that angle as well on it. But when sometimes we are given documents, I mean, the previous council meeting, I had the paper minutes, and it was like that. I did not read all 300 pages or something that James had carefully prepared, and had not read them in advance because I have other things to do in my life.
Unfortunately, I am one of those boring people that do actually read if I have the documents. In this case, I didn't have the document. I didn't read it. And I would therefore suggest that we take the recommendations as two separate votes.
There's no harm in taking them separately. Let me get to my actual recommendation. Note the contents of this report and provide any comments to officers in relation to the use of RIPA and adopt the revised joint RIPA policy. I guess we have to also just what we're doing is we are commenting on the Cabinet's ability to have knowledge and sight of the said documents. And we raise any concerns we have in relation to their competence to analyse and to go through in greater detail, which I'm sure we have an ex-Cabinet member here, and we've got other people here who've sat in cabinets. I'm sure all Cabinet members always read all their documents in such massively detailed levels of inquisitiveness. I'm positive. Yeah. Jonathan, you want to say something?
I was just going to say I'm quite happy for you to say to them on that 8.2 that we're happy as a Cabinet, as a committee, for them to adopt the revised joint as long as they have read it. And you know, if they then say to you, yes, we have all read it, then that's them adopting it, not us adopting it as such. We're happy to let them adopt it if they have confident they have read it.
I mean, we're here to sort of pick apart the seams as opposed of a product as opposed to build it. If that makes sense. Do you know what I mean? We're the sort of picking at the detail and checking that we. But yeah, sorry, I've got something. Adrian wanted to say something. Then we'll come back to you, Martin.
I was just saying, Nick, maybe what we probably have to ask here is, in here it says there's a background paper that says the joint RIPA policy. The background paper has not been provided as part of these papers tonight. So what we should be saying is, we're happy with the recommendations as long as when Cabinet receive this report, the background papers that mentioned in the report are also provided. Because it's a bit like, you've got appendices in here, and after we've got the appendices section with the review document, ideally we could have done with the RIPA policy in here as background paper. So if we wanted to read the whole thing, word by word, letter by letter, we could have done, but that's probably the key thing, isn't it?
But also, again, in light of other policy documents when they come forward, then it's captured at that point. But we also then say that any minor amendments or anything else, and we discussed it earlier, are by the director or associate director in consultation with the portfolio holder, and that this doesn't give us that opportunity either.
We could add that. We could add that, couldn't we, Chair? We could add that.
But without reviewing the policy document itself at this committee, which we haven't done, because all we've done is we've read the report and the annual report. So we haven't looked at the joint policy review and update at all. It's not been discussed at this committee.
We could put that as a supplementary recommendation, Chair, which would allow us to look at the recommendations 8.1 and 8.2, but we could then have, for example, 8.3 and suggest, subject to Cabinet being subject to the Cabinet reading or not reading or adopting the said joint policy statement as per the background papers. So, all right, we're ducking it slightly, but what we are putting the onus on the Cabinet to ensure that they're happy with what they're adopting, because we're only making a recommendation, aren't we? I mean, that is a little bit of a cop out from our point of view, and I admit that. But what it is doing is putting a safeguard in that the Cabinet are happy with what they're adopting, which I think, to me, because again, sorry, as Louise has said, this is a very important document that carries quite a lot of legal implications. It could potentially be used more by this authority as we go forward to deal with some of these anti-social issues, etc., etc. So it is very important that Cabinet have an understanding of what sits behind this report. So I'm saying that would be an easy way, not an easy way, it would be an additional recommendation to simply add that there. Then the onus is on Cabinet, let's be really honest, for them to read it or not, as the case may be. Yeah, get it down to about 10 words, Sinead.
I think we just can't vote on it.
Sorry.
Sorry, I am going to push that back to you, Councillor, just to give some clarity on what the recommendation is, because your role here is to recommend or to not recommend the recommendations as they're outlined, or to make proposed amendments for Cabinet to consider. I'm not entirely sure what you are asking in terms of an amendment to the recommendation. Stuart, sorry.
I think maybe for ease we need to look at this and say we can only vote on recommendation 8.1. We can't vote on recommendation 8.2 because none of us have read the full policy.
You'll have to make a vote on it because you've got it in front of you. So I would assume, based on the discussion, that in that case you would vote for them to not adopt it because you haven't got it in front of you to consider, if that's what I think I'm hearing from the committee, but I will leave that to the committee to deliberate and decide.
In many ways it's fair enough, because they may come back to us and say, well, we have read it and we think it's brilliant, and then subject to that we go, well, you did, great, what we didn't, so we couldn't. I mean, I think that's fair without being political. because I know we're not being political here, and I don't not want that to come across as being party political, but we're not being difficult. We're actually saying, you know, okay, justify why you think it's great, and hopefully they'll do that next Tuesday, and I can feed that back. So we'll take the recommendations separately, assuming there is nothing else to say other than the fact I was going to say you mentioned Horsfield and Volthorpe. I think there'll be some people, I know one resident in particular who has been blighted with litter, detritus from taxis pulling up and parking and throwing rubbish out, human waste being left outside his house. When we end up with grot spots, not just through the decisions of opening and closing new recycling centres, but through poor decisions made about routes for roads. When Horsford was sort of cut off along the Holt Road, we created a new road, the old Holt Road, which has become a dumping ground. We created Brewery Lane with about 3 little bits of road coming off it which go nowhere, which are used as a dumping ground, where people can just pull up almost out of sight. I've gone past and found entrances to farms there which have just had litter strewn all over them. So there's been some very poor decisions made about, on the highway side, about almost deliberately creating places which are ideal for people to dump their rubbish, and we need to think a little bit more carefully about not creating these places in the first place. So I think people in Horsford in particular will be pleased that action may be taken. So thank you for that.
Everybody's going to be surveilled now and on.
I think that one guy in particular was keen that there was some form of surveillance. Unfortunately, we were told that the thresholds are such that he had to fill in a report, a log, keep track of everything that was dumped outside his house for X number of months. And he just said, at my age, I have not got the time, I have not got the ability to go out and do and track all these things. This is what I was told by somebody before we could hit that point, because also there was a question about whether the land outside his house, which is county council land, whether the county council should be dealing with it, and the county council didn't want to deal with it. So we had this sort of like standoff. So, but I think the fact that the actions, and I'm sure that's one of the areas that's being looked at, that might be, I think, be positive. So, to take the recommendations separately, Martin, go on.
I just wanted to thank you for the report in the first instance, and apologies for this, but there's no degradation around the report. The report itself is good. It's just that the policy is not there to review. I just wanted to make that clear.
Absolutely. So we'll take the recommendations. We'll take recommendation 1. All those in favour?
That's carried, yeah.
And recommendation 2, to adopt the revised joint RIPA policy that we have not seen. All those in favour? All those against? Yes. It's not quite everyone. I can't see if Stuart's hands up or down. He's abstaining.
Yep, that's carried in negative.
And we can note the reasons why for that next week. Perhaps in his previous cabinet role, he had such intimate knowledge of the RIPA policy that he feels that he's almost there but can't. So
I could argue that I've got a vested interest.
He regularly, as long as it's not that you regularly fly tip, I imagine it's because where you live, you have a lot of fly tipping issues around where you live. We are closing the meeting at 7:53 p.m. Thank you very much, everybody.